least 2 probes before our first could even get off the ground. Not wanting to lose the ultimate high ground, Space Commander hastily created and launched interplanetary space probes in order to catch up. And despite being developed in a rush, the probes were well equipped with a powerful array of sensors and visual monitoring equipment, with a lot of the technology used being far greater than what NASA had at the time. Able to relay large amounts of information and high-quality images of the various planets, moons, and asteroids in our system, they were supposed to find potential locations for outposts in deep space. However, what they found instead broke everything that we knew about the universe. The 6th probe launched in the program, Solar 6, was tasked with exploring Jupiter and its moons. It was supposed to be like the other missions, boring and uneventful. But upon entering the sphere of influence of the planet, it began seeing wings. Numbering in the hundreds, gigantic golden wings spanning 1,000 miles long and 100 miles wide started appearing in front of the probe. From what could be observed as the probe moved closer to Jupiter, dozens of these wings littered the planet's orbit. Receiving the video feed more than half an hour after they were taken, Solar 6's mission control quickly studied the footage and they were left baffled. Previous observations of the planet had never noted these objects before. Earth-based, Earth-orbiting telescopes and NASA Pioneer and Voyager missions never noticed them. Even the telescopic images of the planet hours before the probe's approach had no visual of them. Yet there they were right in front of the probe, circling it and almost creating a ring. Unsure of how to proceed after the strange sighting, Mission Control quickly passed on the information up the chain of command. Eventually, the reply back to them was to continue with the probe's orbital insertion, but the objective of the reconnaissance shifted from surveying the moons to surveying the wings. However, as the probe conducted its orbital insertion burn, a new object was sighted. Like the wings, this was not seen from any observation devices on or around Earth. Even with its size, it just couldn't be spotted from our planet. Spanning 2,500 miles in diameter and locked into Jupiter's orbit was a giant sphere. Yet, despite its shape, it wasn't a previously undiscovered moon of the planet. Instead, it was another anomaly in this place. And covering the surface of the object were eyes, thousands of them in different sizes, some closed and some open. Along with these eyes were various golden stumps and golden wings, similar to those that were floating around orbit. As the probe got closer and began to orbit around the sphere, 2 of the stumps on the object were found to be far longer than the rest and seemed to have been composed of a different material that resembled skin. However, imagery and electronic scans were not enough to confirm what the material exactly was at the time. Despite that, from all the initial surveys and studies of the object, the scientists and researchers attached to Mission Control believed that whatever the sphere was, it was a living object. At least it had once been living. Found during the mapping of the surface were 2 large holes that penetrated its exterior. Closer inspection and radar mapping of these puncture points revealed the hollow interior of the object. The scientists concluded that this was the likely cause of death of this massive creature. That then left the questions of what killed it and where was the perpetrator now. In search for an answer, Solar 6 was maneuvered all over the orbit of Jupiter, trying to locate any other anomaly in the vicinity. Eventually, the probe ended up in the orbit of Callisto, where another anomaly was found. Floating there was a long limb-like object. On one end of this object was a hand with hundreds of fingers that held a sword. The sword measured 1,000 miles long and 50 miles wide. Like the previous anomalies, it was not able to be viewed from Earth. By the time the mission around Jupiter was declared over, the probe had explored the sphere, the hand and sword, as well as 20 of the wings in order to extract as much information as it could from them. And to the dismay of Mission Control, though, all the surveying did little to reveal where these anomalies came from, why it was here, and how it had met its fate. However, it was at least concluded that all the anomalies found stemmed from one original anomaly, which centered around the large spherical object. Due to this, it, as well as its spread of remains, was designated as Cosmic Anomaly Number 1 and marked for future explorations by future probes dedicated to its study. On the other hand, the anomaly responsible for killing Cosmic Anomaly Number 1 was designated as Cosmic Anomaly Number 2, although concrete proof of existence has yet to be found. Furthermore, the presence of such an anomaly, as well as the unknown location and state of the mysterious Cosmic Anomaly Number 2, prompted Air Force Space Command to take more actions at better monitoring and securing deep space. With the government's backing, funds were secretly provided to Air Force Space Command, to the dismay of supporters of the Strategic Defense Initiative. The government believed that threats from deep space were far more concerning than ones from Earth. In order to limit the number of personnel aware of cosmic anomalies so that secrecy could be easier maintained, the Anti-Cosmic Threat Division, or ACT Division for short, was formed by Space Command. That way, all such cosmic issues could be funneled into the division and ensure that no information about them could leak out to the public and cause mass panic. With backing and funding from the government, the ACT Division proceeded to create and launch a series of missions to further increase their monitoring abilities in deep space, fearing that Cosmic Anomaly Number 2 may emerge again and threaten human spacecraft or Earth itself. Unmanned monitoring stations were established at our natural satellite and the natural satellites of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Additionally, missions were also launched to Jupiter with the goal of further exploring and studying the remnants of Cosmic Anomaly Number 1. With this being humanity's first encounter with an extraterrestrial life form, the scientists attached to the ACT Division were desperate to learn more about it. However, the constant travel of spacecraft from Earth and the solar system's planets resulted in encounters with new cosmic anomalies. Jupiter Picket 10 was to be the 10th monitoring post for the Jupiter observation line. It was supposed to be a fairly normal and uneventful mission, but on the 16th month of its journey, while it was still on approach to Jupiter, it encountered a strange object that suddenly manifested before it. Analysis of footage and radar readings before the encounter showed no sign of anything in the vicinity of the spacecraft at the time. Yet in the flash of a moment, an object that resembled a naval vessel appeared before it. Further examination of the object revealed to Mission Control that it looked similar to a destroyer escort from the Second World War. That alone was a strange sight. However, careful observation of the object revealed that it wasn't just a mere destroyer somehow lost in space. On the ship's hull, dotted all over it, were various human body parts. From heads, arms, legs, and whole torsos, these parts protruded from the hull and moved frantically and erratically. These parts weren't just sticking out from the ship though. Instead, they seemed to be a part of the ship, somehow merged with the steel that it was made from. Focusing Jupiter Picket 10's camera on the various protruding heads on the hull, a majority of them could be seen with their mouths wide open. Whatever sound they could be making, however, could not be heard through the vacuum of space. From the pained expression on their faces, though, it was believed by many in Mission Control that they were screaming. One head presented a different expression to the rest, though. Located near the bridge of the destroyer escort, the head's eyes stared directly at the probe's camera, as if it knew where it was located. After gazing at the camera with a pained and sad expression, it then opened and closed its mouth slowly, as if it was trying to communicate something. Based on the interpretation of its lip movement, experts concluded that it was trying to say, "Help us." And then, just as suddenly as the object had appeared, it suddenly disappeared, leaving no trace aside from the imagery and data that our probe had recorded. One important piece of information gathered from the encounter was the name and hull number of the destroyer escort. However, when the Air Force inquired the Navy about information on the ship that bore that name and number, all the Navy stated that it had indeed been a ship commissioned with them during the Second World War. All further information about its service, though, were marked as confidential and could not be shared. The Act Division would eventually label this object as Cosmic Anomaly Number 3, and it would periodically appear and be detected for brief moments of time over the years. As more probes and unmanned installations were launched and positioned across the solar system, the Act Division slowly but surely got a better look of the deep space that surrounded us. This also meant the revelation of more anomalies. A few years after first encounter with Cosmic Anomaly Number 3, the Act Division started losing contact with the picket stationed on Saturn and its moons. One by one, the probes and installations there suddenly stopped transmitting. Reviewing the footage from the probes before they stopped transmitting, the Act Division did their best to try to figure out what exactly had happened. It turned out to be a difficult task, though, as the available footage didn't show what could have been the cause. And due to this, it was believed that the loss of transmission could have been caused by a sudden interference in the area that prevented the probes and installation from transmitting its signals back to Earth. However, a frame from the footage caught by Saturn Station 16 told a different tale. Emplaced at the moon of Phoebe, it managed to catch sight of something that looked like a scaly tentacle heading towards it. It only appeared briefly, but it caught in it a single frame before transmission was lost. That was the evidence that proved what had happened wasn't a simple signal anomaly. At first, it was believed that this was the result of Cosmic Anomaly Number 2, as it had been the only anomaly that had been deemed active and hostile at the time. Although this caused some fear among the members of the Act Division, they were not caught unprepared. They had been preparing for years for such a scenario and soon quickly got into action activating contingency plans. The main contingency plan applied for this threat was Operation Hammer, which relied on armed autonomous probes to deal with the threat. Armed with an array of nuclear-tipped missiles, the probes, dubbed Vanguard Deep Space Strike Vehicles, were to swarm the anomaly and bombard its payload. There was no guarantee that dozens upon dozens of nuclear weapons would be enough to destroy a cosmic anomaly, but at the time it was the best weapon that the Act Division had. In order for the Vanguard probes to strike their target, though, they must first find it. And due to this, all the probes and installations throughout the solar system were thoroughly monitored to see if they could catch a glimpse of Cosmic Anomaly Number 2. But aside from the loss of the ones at the Saturn observation line, no other monitoring system was lost or had caught sight of the anomaly. It seemed that the threat was limited to the Saturn area. To establish better surveillance of the threat, a series of reconnaissance probes were launched to replace the monitoring posts that were lost at Saturn, so that these probes would reach Saturn quickly and prevent the anomaly from disappearing while we were blind. They were equipped with the continuous acceleration drive. And this new propulsion system enabled spacecraft to increase its speed substantially and cut down travel time through the solar system. Yet despite this, the first of the reconnaissance probes, Eagle Eye 1, did not arrive at Saturn's sphere of influence until 13 months after its launch. Due to this, it was feared by many in the Act Division that the anomaly had slipped past them during the wide interval. As it would turn out, that wasn't the case. The moment the probe got close to Saturn, a set of scaly tentacles suddenly reached out towards it. The speed of the tentacles was so fast that they were barely caught by the probe's cameras. One moment it was flying through space, and the next it was held in place and unable to maneuver away. It was just like what had happened to Saturn Station 16. This time it was different though. Instead of immediately destroying the probe, the tentacle wrapped itself around it first and held it in place. Then, to the surprise of everybody in mission control, a smaller tentacle suddenly emerged and began tapping on one of the probe's cameras. The tapping continued for a few minutes, before the tentacle began rubbing itself on the camera's lens. As it did this, a dark black red liquid was left imprinted on the lens. Eventually, it managed to write out, "Leave me alone." After that, a signal from Eagle Eye 1 was lost. And due to the passivity of the anomaly and the fact that it seemed to be fixed in its orbit, the Activision concluded that the living planet of Saturn was not Cosmic Anomaly number 2, but a different anomaly of its own. With its tentacles' impressive yet still limited reach, it declared impossible for it to have attacked Cosmic Anomaly number 1 at Jupiter. Saturn was thus labeled as Cosmic Anomaly number 4. Realizing that no amount of nuclear warheads would be enough to destroy a planet, Operation Hammer was canceled before the Vanguard probes could connect their trans-Saturn injection. Meanwhile, the reconnaissance probes already sent out were maneuvered to ensure that they positioned themselves in a high orbit above Saturn, thus ensured that they were just out of reach of the planet's deadly tentacles. Once in a while, the high-orbiting probes would observe the planet, attempt to grab for them, but to no avail. The first face-to-face encounter between man and the anomaly occurred during REAP missions. The missions were a part of a wider operation called Lazarus, which had the main goal of collecting the remains of Cosmic Anomaly number 1 in order to further study them and see what could be useful for humanity. The mission also happens to be my first assignment with the Activision after graduating from the Air Force's astronaut training program. Assigned to mission control, I was one of the astronauts that acted as Capcom for the 5-man crew aboard the manned deep space transporter heading to Jupiter. Thanks to the continuous acceleration drive, travel time for the crew to their destination only took 8 months. However, barely even 2 months into their journey, the mission encountered something strange. It began with an alert. Deep space monitoring satellites in Earth orbit and the radar aboard the spacecraft detected a dense group of unidentified objects ahead of the vehicle. Observing these objects and calculating their trajectory, it was found that they were on a perpendicular path towards the spacecraft. Knowing the dangers of flying into a field of deep space objects, the mission's FIDO suggested a quick maneuver to ensure that the spacecraft avoided intersecting with the objects. However, before I could call them up to relay this to the crew, the commander of the spacecraft sent out a transmission first.
Midway, this is Reaper 1. Came the call on my headset and the speakers around the mission control center. Are you seeing what we're seeing? I think we see someone floating in there.
Reaper 1, this is Midway, I transmitted. What do you mean by someone? Do you mean an anomaly or do you mean humans? The distance between us and the spacecraft meant that there would be a delay in the reply. As we waited though, the mission's Cronus displayed the video feed that was being received directly from Reaper 1. In it we could see footage from one of the high-powered exterior cameras being controlled by the crew, as they pointed and focused in on the unknown object cluster. Zooming in on the cluster, images of various broken and torn spacecraft modules could be seen floating in space. It then became evident that the objects being detected were from a destroyed spacecraft. A further scan of some of these modules revealed the Russian flag, giving us an identity as to where they were from. Air Force Space Command had known that Russian spacecraft were also operating in deep space, but the fact that one of them was destroyed was news to me. As the camera shifted away from the modules, it soon focused in on a different subject. Caught in the middle of the cluster was a figure of a man, naked, bloated, and completely exposed to the vacuum of space. The man floated freely among the debris. He wasn't alone though. 3 more men were seen floating freely just like him, completely unprotected and bloated. And due to their situation, it wasn't hard to understand why many in mission control quickly concluded that they were dead and had most likely been sucked out when their spacecraft was suddenly destroyed. However, continued observation pointed out that there was something wrong about them. When comparing their size with the size of the debris around them, it was soon realized that they were far larger than it. Estimates revealed that the 4 floating men were at least 50 meters in height. Yet that wasn't the only strange thing about it.
Midway, this is Reaper 1.
Came the sudden transmission from the crew as we at Mission Control scratched our heads and wondered what had happened to those cosmonauts.
We think they're still alive.
Sure enough, as we further studied the footage, we could see subtle movements from each of the men, as their arms and legs fidgeted and swung. Somehow, despite being completely exposed to the harshness of space, they were still alive. They weren't just alive though, they were also fully conscious and in complete pain. Reaper 1 eventually maneuvered just enough to avoid the cluster, yet still close enough to get a good look at it from its cameras. The crew and us in Mission Control got a better look of the cosmonauts. The image would forever be ingrained in my mind. Eyes bloated, expression contorted in pain. They were clearly suffering. Somehow, something was preventing death to end their torture. As the cluster passed by and continued on its journey, I shuddered at the thought that they would be forever stuck in a solar orbit, unable to end their pain, as they drifted in space for eternity. The Activision would label those 4 unfortunate cosmonauts, including whatever caused them to expand that large and become seemingly immortal, as Cosmic Anomaly number 5. Following a year-long assignment as a Capcom for a few more REAP missions, I eventually began training for a long-term space operations in order to join in the next phase of Operation Lazarus. When I was finally sent up a year and a half after the training, I found myself on a journey to Jupiter and my new place of deployment, Archangel Station. Built within the remains of Cosmic Anomaly number 1, Archangel Station was the farthest manned outpost the Activision had in deep space. Created in order to easier study the remnants of the anomaly, as well as ensure that the nation had a strong presence at Jupiter, the station was thus a crucial part of Space Command. When I first arrived at the station, the majority of its infrastructure had already been completed. Beneath the surface of the once living entity, a series of layered structures were constructed, which housed the living quarters, the command center, the science bay, nuclear reactors, and various other facilities necessary for the station's mission and day-to-day needs. There was, however, a lot of activity and new construction when I had arrived at the station. As we approached the monstrous sphere orbiting Jupiter, I saw some astronauts conducting EVAs on one side of the facility, where they conducted work to attach and secure dozens of continuous acceleration drives onto the surface. Meanwhile, on a different portion of the sphere, work was being done for an extremely large docking area, with various electrical wiring, hydraulics, and strange red-colored calves being placed there by a team of astronauts. What exactly they were doing there, I wasn't sure at the time, but I made no effort trying to figure it out. After all, my mission here involves something else, and I didn't want to waste time wondering about things that I knew I wouldn't get the answers to unless the Activision deemed it necessary for me to know. After a month of getting acquainted with life in the station and assisting in various auxiliary duties, I and 44 other astronauts were transported out of the station and sent to Callisto, in orbit around the moon, to a relatively small outpost in comparison to Archangel Station. Labeled as Outpost number 12, the modular station could house up to 100 astronauts and orbited around the moon. Meanwhile, directly below it and also orbiting Jupiter's natural satellite was the titanic, anomalous sword and severed arm of Cosmic Anomaly number 1. Our mission at Outpost number 12 was simple: to recover the sword and bring it to Archangel Station for studying and testing. However, throughout the entire process, our stay in the station was anything but peaceful. It all began with the voices. No matter what time it was, somehow the sound of hoarse, tired, and sorrowful voices echoed from outside the walls of the station. We didn't know how it was possible, and video observation of the hall revealed nothing there, yet we could hear it. And during my first sleep cycle at Outpost 12, the voices kept on speaking words that I couldn't understand. It kept me up all through the hours that I was supposed to be sleeping, as I felt uneasy the entire time and felt as if someone was watching me because of them. Of course, senior officers at Archangel Station were aware of this situation after we had informed them of what we were hearing. The suggestion of the chief medical officers over there was for us to use sleeping pills to get through our sleeping cycles, but somehow they did little to help us, as the voices still kept us awake. By my second sleep cycle, the voices started to become clearer, as I was able to understand some of the words that they were saying. Help, Michael, flames. All the words they said seemed random, but they kept me up again nonetheless. Attempts to drown out the noise with a headset and music were met with utter failure too, as I could somehow still hear them despite those tools. And by the third night, however, I somehow got acclimated to the noise and eventually got some much needed rest. When I woke up, a lot of the other astronauts, aside from an unlucky few, had also gotten used to the voices. However, on day 7 of our stay there, things started to become stranger. I had just finished a long work cycle, having conducted hours of EVA to attach maneuvering thruster pods onto the anomalous swords. As I closed my eyes to start my sleep cycle, I heard the usual call of the voices start, but there was something different. Suddenly opening my eyes, I stared at the walls of my cabin and I listened once again. "Son, is that you?" the voice said, but this wasn't the voice of a stranger. It was the voice of my long deceased father. "Son, please talk to me." The voice spoke again, continuing to bear my father's voice. Hearing it speak with my father's voice made me sure that I wasn't just imagining it. It was definitely his voice that I was hearing, and it sent a shiver of fear down my spine. How was it doing that? How did it know my father's voice? He had been dead for years. Sighing, I tried my best to ignore it. I had learned how to sleep with the voices for a few days by that point, so I was sure that I could do it again. And yet I couldn't. Hearing them steal my father's voice and use it to call to me specifically brought a new form of fear and uneasiness. And by the time that my sleep cycle had ended, it was clear that I wasn't the only one suffering from the new attacks that these bodiless anomalies were doing. My batch that was scheduled to sleep that night were kept awake by hearing voices of loved ones and friends calling out to them. Other astronauts who went through followed us suffered the same fate. This was bad news for us who had just gotten used to sleeping with the noise, but even worse for those who still hadn't rested at all. Eventually, Major Stewart, the commander of the outpost, had to place these people on light duty, as they were clearly not fit to do any other work. For days, the voices continued to call to us, with each person hearing different voices of people that they knew each time they tried to go to sleep. For me, I heard the voices of my father, mother, ex-girlfriends, and even old teachers call out to me. It was terrible, and I often ended up shouting back at the voices, telling them to stop. And during some sleep cycles, I was able to block out the noise and get some resemblance of sleep. But eventually, I would be rudely awakened, as the voices called out my name just to disturb me. After a few days of such a constant harassment, it began to take a toll on me and everybody on board. Work efficiency drastically dropped, yet we powered on, knowing that the sooner we accomplished our task, the sooner we would leave. And then came the incident. It happened during the end of my work shift, and due to the fatigue I gained from the recent change in the voices, I was relegated to light duties as a communications officer in the command module of the outpost. And joining me there was Lieutenant Phillips, a younger astronaut who I got to know pretty well on the way to the Jupiter observation line. Like me, he was fatigued by the recent change in the voices and was given light duties as the outpost systems officer. Unlike me though, he looked like a walking zombie, with large, dark bags under his bloodshot eyes. He was clearly in far worse shape than I was. While I only lost sleep when the voices started bearing the names of people that we knew, Phillips had barely slept at all since we were sent to the outpost. In the almost 2 weeks that we've been there, he's only had 3 sleep cycles of rest and none of them complete and continuous. And that was why he was assigned to light duties, such as keeping an eye on the outpost systems, because it would cause the least trouble if he ever slipped up from fatigue. At least, that was what we thought at the time. As I was floating by the communication system, headset on and listening to the chatter by those out on EVA, I suddenly heard someone speak inside the module. At first, I thought it was Phillips greeting Major Stewart, who was supposed to be checking up on us around that time. To my surprise, though, Major Stewart wasn't there. As I turned around to check, all I saw was Phillips talking to himself. Curious, I slowly took off my headset and managed to catch a portion of what he was saying. "Yes, Major, I'll do it immediately," was what Phillips said, before floating towards the control panel that controlled the outposts, hatches, and airlocks. And before I could even ask him what he was doing, he suddenly started opening a few of switch guards before quickly flipping the switches. Suddenly, an alarm in the command module started blaring and screeching, as a screen nearby alerted that the air pressure in the crew quarters module was plummeting. Turning my head to another screen, I watched in horror as the surveillance camera pointed at Airlock D displayed fellow astronauts being sucked out of their cabins and thrown into the vacuum of space. "What did you do?" I asked, as I pushed my way and quickly floated towards the control panel that Phillips was at, and began switching them back to close the hatches that he had opened. "I was just following the Major's orders," Phillips simply replied to me. I stared back at him with a confused expression. "The Major's orders?" I said in disbelief, as I gestured to the module that was empty aside from the presence of us two. "Are you out of your mind? He's not here." "No," he simply said in reply as he shook his head. "His orders were loud and clear. Open the airlocks, that's what he told me directly." "Phillips, nobody gave you those orders," I yelled back. And then a voice spoke to me. It was Major Stewart's voice. "And that's right. No one gave him those orders. He simply acted on his own." Relieved to finally have some backup, I turned around hoping to see Major Stewart there. But he wasn't. Instead, it was just the empty module. And that was strange. I swear that I heard the Major for a second. Turning back to face Phillips, I looked at him to see an empty expression on his face. It didn't yet seem that he had realized what he had done. "Oh, the fatigue has gotten to him." The Major's voice spoke again. I turned around once more, but like before, he wasn't there. This was starting to scare me as I looked around the module, hoping to see any sign of the Major. Perhaps it came from the radio, I eventually thought. Maybe I was hearing his voice echoing up from my headset. With the headset still connected to the radio on the other side of the module, it seemed strange that I managed to hear the Major's voice so clearly, but it was the only logical explanation. "You must kill him to protect the outposts." A chill ran down my spine as I heard that. I suddenly felt scared. But it wasn't because of what the Major's voice said. No, it wasn't because of that. It was because I was certain that I heard the voice from inside my head. How was that possible? "Kill him," the voice repeated, more aggressive this time. "Do it, kill him," the voice ordered, as I placed my hands on my ears. It was to no avail though, as I could still hear the voice. "Kill him," it repeated, but this time it sounded different. "Kill him and save the outposts." At that point I realized that it now sounded like my voice. It was starting to sound as if it was my own thoughts telling me what to do. Kill him, kill him, kill him. As the voice inside my head raised, a crescendo in my head, another voice suddenly echoed out. What the hell happened here? It was the Major's voice again, but this time it sounded different. Turning around, I was thankful to see Major Stewart and 2 other officers floating by the entrance to the module, looking at me before turning their attention to Phillips, and then they floated towards us to understand what exactly had unfolded. In the end, Phillips was confined into the medical bay before being transported out of Outpost 12 and sent back to the station for further examination and treatment. From what I heard, the moment that he left the outpost, he seemed to have returned to his normal self, although the news that his actions had resulted in the death of 20 fellow astronauts seemed to have scared him. Following the incident, those of us who stayed for a few more days to finish attaching a few more thruster pods on the Titan sword before we too were ordered out of Outpost number 12. The moment that we got out of there was one of the happiest moments in my life, and I suddenly felt free from the constant voices. My first sleep cycle at Archangel Station after our return was the best sleep that I had my entire life, and due to the harassing voices, which was eventually labeled as Cosmic Anomaly number 6, deployment to Outpost number 12 was limited to a week. This resulted in the constant shifting of personnel and slow progress on the retrieval of the Titan sword, but I didn't care. I was glad that I was out of the outpost and lucky that I didn't get assigned there again. The rest of my stay in Archangel Station revolved around helping with the rather large docking port. Every work cycle that I spent there, I wondered why such a large docking port was needed. Eventually, though, I got my answer. A large arm was one day sent to the station, and it looked both grotesque and intriguing. Looking eerily too close to a human arm, it was extremely bloated and red. Covering it were various mechanical and electronic parts that were stabbed into the skin of the arm. Us junior officers were not exactly sure where the arm came from, but some of us had our theories. It was a common topic at the mess hall, and I remember the favorite theory involved experimentations with Cosmic Anomaly number 5. By the time that I left Archangel Station, the hand had been fully attached to the docking port built for it. Also completed was the recovery of the sword in orbit of Callisto. As the spacecraft I was on began its journey back to Earth, I couldn't help but stare at the small viewing port and look at the Titanic sword floating next to the station and close to the large swollen hand now on it. Now I can't help but think about that again. I am set to return back to the station soon, and a lot has changed since I was last there. The station has had a lot of additions placed on and in it, and in its mission has changed from a simple research and symbolic station to one that was crucial to the defense of the solar system. Meanwhile, I had risen through the ranks to become a lieutenant colonel in the Act Division, which was now part of the Space Force. With the creation of this new branch, more funding and resources were provided to us to protect Earth and maintain the secret of cosmic threats away from the public. Yet now I've decided to post this before I leave and break the very secret that we have worked hard to protect. It is important that I do this now before I leave, because I fear that I won't have another opportunity to do so, and I doubt that the government will dare say a thing if we fail in our mission. We have found Cosmic Anomaly number 2, and it has its eyes on Earth. Our only hope of stopping it is using the carcass of an anomaly